Before we begin, I want to thank Feverstockphoto for allowing me to use his solves in this video. Link to his YouTube channel will be in the video description. If you would like to have your solves critiqued as well, feel free to send me a video of yourself doing an average. Link to my social media pages will also be in the description. If I do decide to use your solves in a video, I'll be sure to give you a shout out as well. So for the first scramble, we notice that we have two cross pieces on the top layer here, and we have another two on the bottom layer here. So we notice that green and orange are actually correct relative to each other, and I think you noticed that as well. So immediately what you did is you did a D2, and what that did was align green and orange to their respective centers. You then did a U prime and then moved blue down, and then rotated to move red down. So there's a couple of things you can improve on when building the cross. First of all is that you don't need to start off by aligning these cross pieces to the centers. It's okay if they're just off, but as long as your cross is correct relative to each other, that's perfectly fine. So in here, you notice that orange and green are actually correct relative to each other. And so what we can do is just keep the cross misaligned and insert red and blue correct, once again, relative to each other. So in this case, you could either move the U layer or the D layer. In this case, I think it would be easier if we just move the D layer. So notice that if we move green to the back, we can insert red and blue with R2 followed by F2, and then align the cross at the very end. And that solves the entire cross, makes it a lot more efficient as well. Also makes the finger tricks better, and you don't need to rotate as well. So for your first F2L pair, you did the red and green pair, which is pretty good because it's already paired up to each other. So you rotated over and you inserted the F2L pair into the front like that. So when you finished making the cross, you were facing this angle, which is the blue center facing towards you, and the red and green F2L pair belonged at the back. So for the first F2L pair, I usually recommend, if possible, to insert into a back slot. That way it improves your look ahead because you have a bunch of open slots that you can look to. So in this case, what I would recommend is the same exact moves that you did, but just into the back. So like this. And that solves this pair into the back, and you'll notice that because it's at the back, it doesn't interfere with your look ahead because you have a bunch of open slots that you can look to. So this is a slightly more advanced tip. So you notice that with the moves you did into the back, you'll have to move the F2L pair over first. So to insert into the back, you'll have to regrip and insert like this. So you can avoid that regrip by doing a special finger trick like this, but that usually isn't recommended. Instead, to avoid that regrip, you can insert with a U2 instead. So F2L pair was already in this position, so you don't have to move it, just bring this slot up, do a U2 and then bring it back down. That also inserts the F2L pair in here, and it does so without a regrip. So for the next F2L pair, you had orange and blue. So the corner is here and the edge is back here. So what you did is you rotated first so that you could see the slot, and then you did a U2, and then you paired this up the regular way, which is by hiding the corner and moving the edge over like this. And then you followed up with another rotation. This time you rotated towards the slot once again and inserted with your left hand. So a few things to note for this specific F2L case is that first of all, you don't need to rotate and use this slot to break it up. Instead, you can use any unsolved slot to break it up. So in this case, it actually is a lot easier if you use this orange-green slot to break up, well, not break up, but pair up these F2L pieces. So instead of pairing them up using this slot and then rotating again to insert, instead what we can do is position it so that you're using a different unsolved slot to pair them up. And in this case, it's really nice because after you pair them up, you can go straight into an R2 to insert into the back slot once again. So that makes the moves a lot more efficient, and these moves actually flow really nice in an actual solve. So moving on to the next F2L pair, you spotted the orange and green F2L pair. So what you did is you rotated first, you did a U2 to notice what case this was, and then you rotated again and did this case, which is pretty standard. It's triple sexy, I believe, like that. So there was nothing wrong with the way you solved the F2L case. The standard way to solve this would be to use triple sexy, but instead of rotating twice to have it as a front slot, instead what you could do is recognize the case from this side, because you notice how you have another unsolved F2L pair here. So it'd be nice if you don't have to rotate here and then rotate all the way back to solve this. Instead, you could just do it from the back angle using triple sexy from the back side. So you could do something like this, insert the corner into the back and repeat the moves, and that gets a pair sort of paired up at the back, and then you can insert into the back just like that. So finally you had the red and blue case, which you rotated this way and set up this particular case where you hid the corner and moved the edge next to the corner like this, and then you inserted at the front like that. So following that, you had 2-look OLO, which is perfectly fine. So a common thing that I noticed even throughout F2L and OLO as well is that you don't like to do U2 flicks, or maybe you don't know how to do them. So in this case, you noticed that you had to get these headlights to the front. So you did 2 U's, and I was noticing this a lot during your F2L as well, but definitely know how to do U2s. So it's index finger followed by middle finger, and try to learn them with both hands as well, because these finger tricks will come in handy a lot during algorithms and F2L, and especially in this algorithm as well. So you'll notice that if you do U2s, the algorithm flows a lot better. So after OLO, you got this PLO, which is the GC perm. So I noticed that you looked at the back to see this 2x1 bar, and then you did a U2 to do the algorithm. Instead, looking at these 3 sides would be totally enough to see that this is actually a GC perm. And that's because you'll notice that the 4 stickers on the left here alternate red, green. And so if it's 4 stickers that have this alternating pattern, then the 2x1 bar is definitely in this position, and it's definitely a GC perm. So anyway, you recognize that this is a GC perm, and you did this algorithm from this angle. So for the algorithm that you did, I would definitely recommend learning U2 double flicks. So that comes up quite a lot in this algorithm, especially with the F2 followed by the U2. So you notice that it flows a lot nicer if you do the U2 finger tricks. But I also noticed that you paused to recognize AUF after the algorithm. Instead, with this algorithm that you used, the AUF is recognized by this front 2x1 bar. So because this is an orange bar and orange belongs on the opposite side, you should know that after the algorithm, it should be a U2 AUF. So for this next scramble, you had your cross pieces here and one here. So what you did is, first of all, you aligned orange with a D2, and then you did a U prime so that blue and red were all lined up with their centers. Then you inserted blue, rotated, inserted red, and then you had green left, which you inserted from the back like that. So similar to the last solve, you did a rotation during the cross where you could have avoided one. So in this case, the cross isn't too good, but instead of starting from the orange face, I would have started facing the green center. And that's because I noticed that if I do a U move, all my cross pieces are on the right side. And so being right-handed, I would rather have a lot more R moves to deal with. So this is actually a good thing. So notice how if I do an R prime, that sets orange and green up to their opposite centers. And you notice that orange is already attached to its red center, which is also an opposite center. So that means that the cross will be built correct, but just off by a D2, which is fine because we can do the D2 at the very end to align the cross. So now that they're all attached to their opposite centers, we can insert them one by one. So we can put down the green cross piece first from the back like this. Then we can put down red. And as we insert red, we notice that the blue ends up attached to its opposite center. So we can put that into the cross as well. And then D2 at the end to align the cross. For the first F2L pair, you looked around and you found the red and blue pair, which is right here. So you move the corner on top of the edge to see what case it is, and you notice that they got paired up. So from here you rotated so that the F2L pair was on the right side. So you took it out, and then you inserted at the front. So for this particular case, where you have an F2L pair upside down, going into an adjacent slot, perhaps a less intuitive but more efficient way to do it is to take the F2L pair out and put it in this position so you can go straight into the insert. So you take the F2L pair out like this so that it goes into this position here, and you notice that from the back it will go straight into the F2L slot like this. So that way you solve a back slot as well, and you can look ahead to other stuff, and it's a lot more efficient as well because you don't have to rotate for these moves. So for the next F2L pair, you rotate it and you found the red and green pair, which you did the regular way, which is pretty good. You hid the edge and moved the corner over with a U2, and then you had this case, which you inserted into the front left. So a good thing about most of your solves is that you seem to use your right hand and your left hand quite evenly during F2L, which is definitely a good habit and you should definitely keep it up. Moving on to your third F2L pair, you spotted the orange and blue F2L pair. So they ended up pairing up again, which is pretty good, but this time it goes into its own slot. So what you did here is, once again, you did it quite intuitively. So you took out the F2L pair and you put it at the back, like this, and then you moved it over and inserted into the front. So once again, for this particular case, the more efficient solution is actually the less intuitive solution, but it's actually really fast and it's rotationless as well, so it's definitely worth learning. So in this case, even though they pair up like this, when you start the case, you actually need the corner to belong at the back. And so from this angle, we do a sledgehammer on this edge. So it goes like R prime, F, R, F prime. And that actually forms a connected F2L pair, which you can go straight into the insert with. But in this case, what you did is fine as well. So you took the F2L pair out and then you inserted. The problem with your insert is that you rotated away from the unsolved F2L pair to insert here. So after you inserted, you had to rotate twice again to face this F2L pair. So instead, what I would recommend is that after you paired them up, you rotate the other way so that once you insert into a back slot, you have more stuff to look ahead to. So anyway, after you inserted the orange-blue F2L pair, you rotated twice and then you recognized this case, and you didn't do any random U moves, which is pretty good. Even though it took you a while to recognize, it is a good habit to try and deduce pieces before you do any unnecessary moves. So in this case, because it was already set up, any U moves would have been unnecessary. So you went straight into pairing them up with a sledgehammer, which is pretty good. And then you inserted into the front. Next, you have Tuluk Olo. and then you had the J-perm. So I mentioned this in your first solve, but I do recommend using U2 flicks, so double flicks, in this algorithm because it once again shows up quite a lot, and it will make the algorithm flow a lot smoother as well, especially for the algorithm that you did, which requires a lot of double flicks. So for your third solve, you had your cross pieces here and here. So you notice that green is already set up opposite to blue. So you started off the solve doing a U prime to move the red cross piece out of the way, so you can put green in like this. Then you did a D2 to align your two cross pieces, followed by another U prime, which sets orange up for the 3-move insert, which you did like that. And also you went straight into inserting red like this. So that made your cross on the bottom. So instead of your first move being to move red out of the way, instead I would keep red here, because if you notice, if you just put green into the cross like this, you've set up red onto its opposite center as well. So when you put red down into the cross, you've aligned 3 cross pieces. So after inserting your 3 cross pieces, then we can do a D2 to align them to their centers, and then finish off by inserting orange at the front as well. So for your first F2L pair, you had your orange-green F2L pair, which was here. So you took the edge out like this, which is good because it paired it up with the corner. And then you rotated and used your left hand to insert into the front. So the way you took out the edge to pair it up with the corner was quite good, because in 3 moves you paired the pair up. But in this case, I would insert into the back because it helps with look ahead. And I noticed that in your solve, you didn't actually see this orange-blue pair, which would have been really obvious had you been facing this direction. Following that, you rotated around to look for your next F2L pair. And I think you eventually saw the red and blue F2L pair. So I'm still amazed that you didn't see this one, but that's okay. So you paired up the red and blue F2L pair like this, and then rotated again to insert into the front like this. For your third F2L pair, you eventually spotted the orange-blue F2L pair. So you did it quite well. You moved the corner to the back and took out the edge into this position, which ended up with a paired case, which is quite good. And then you insert it into the front slot as well. So I've already mentioned this in your previous solve, but whenever you have a pair going into either this slot or this slot, you want to be facing your unsolved slot. So in this case, if you had rotated this direction and inserted this pair into the back, you would have had a nicer time looking ahead to your next pieces. In this case, you actually got quite lucky. These were quite easy to spot. But usually the rule of thumb is you want to have more unsolved pieces facing you so that you have more stuff to look ahead to. Finally, we have the red and green pair, which is already paired up, which is quite good. So here you rotated all the way to the front and you inserted the pair like this. Instead, because you're already facing this angle, you could have set up the corner into this position and inserted into the back. That way you didn't have to do a double rotation to get it as a front slot. So after that, you had 2-look OLO. For PLO, you recognize that this was a J-perm, but you did one of these to recognize the PLO. In this case, I think you would have been able to recognize it just looking at these 3 sides. I know it's a common habit for a lot of people to just do one of these, whether they need to do one or not. It definitely takes up quite a lot more time than you expect. So for PLO recognition, I usually recommend to look at 3 sides, and you should be able to tell exactly what PLO this is just by looking at these sides. In this case, this will be a JB perm, which is the one that's comfortably done with your right hand. And also you didn't have any AUF because the front block was matching. So for your fourth scramble, you had all your cross pieces at the front here. So you started the solve with a U2, perhaps to line up red to its respective center opposite to orange. Then you inserted green, followed by a D2 to align green to its center. Following that, you did the orange cross piece like this, rotating over to insert red. And finally, you inserted blue at the front into this position like this. So again, you had a rotation during your cross, which you could have avoided simply by starting on a different face. So because all the cross pieces are on this face, I like to usually hold it so that it's on the right side. So in this case, what I would do is insert red first, followed by a D2, so that aligns red up to its center. Then you could insert green because that's aligned with its center as well. Then you can put down orange, which is facing the back here. And then as you insert orange, you can insert blue as well, which should be attached to its center at the back. For your first F2L pair, you spotted the red and blue pair, which you paired up like this, which is quite good. And then you rotated over and solved into a front slot. So the way you paired up this F2L pair is perfectly fine. This was done quite well. But in this case, and I mentioned this in your previous solves as well, whenever you're solving your first F2L pair, try and solve it into a back slot. That way you have a lot more unsolved pieces, potential F2L pieces that you can look ahead to. For your second F2L pair, you spotted the orange-blue pair, which you did by taking out the F2L pair into this position and then inserting it once again at the front. Doing the moves that you did, I would once again recommend that you insert into a back slot. So in this case, rotating this way and inserting into this position. Once again, you'll have more stuff to look ahead to. But a more efficient and maybe less intuitive way of inserting this pair into the diagonal slot is kind of similar to the case into an adjacent slot, but this time it's into a diagonal slot. So instead what you can do is bring the slot up first and then move this F2L pair into this position with an F prime move, move the F2L pair into the slot and undo the setup moves. And that's a nice way of moving a already solved F2L pair into a diagonal slot. So anyway, after doing that, you spotted the red and green F2L pair, which you paired up by hiding the edge and moving the corner over like this, which is quite good. And then you rotated over to insert this pair like this. Finally, you had the orange and green pair, which is pretty straightforward. They were already paired up, so you went straight into the insert. So here you had OLO, and that was followed by an E-perm. So E-perms are usually quite difficult to recognize. Once again, you did one of these, but in this case, E-perms are usually recognized by their corner and the side edge color. So when these are matching, it's usually an E-perm, and that's the exact angle in which you do the E-perm. And finally, AUF is recognized by this middle edge piece. So for this final scramble, you had your cross pieces here and another one here. So you started off this solve by inserting red by attaching it to its center and then inserting the green cross piece across from it or adjacent from it. Following that, you did a rotation and another rotation. Eventually you spotted the blue and orange, which coincidentally was already set up correct to each other, and so you followed up by inserting those two as well, making a cross on the bottom. So in that cross solution you had 2 rotations, when once again you could have had 0. In this case you notice that blue is already set up to its center. So after you insert red and green, you can return blue back to the bottom as well, so you don't have to insert it again. And then finally, after all that, you should have seen that the orange cross piece is not affected, so it didn't move the whole time, which means that you could do your 3-move insert into the back, and that makes the cross on the bottom with no rotations. For your first F2L pair, you found this orange-green pair. So I've already talked about the optimal way to solve an adjacent already solved F2L case, so I won't go through it again. But in this case, you took it out as usual and inserted it into the front, which is fine. Next up, you had the orange-blue pair, which you spotted on the top here, and you paired up like this, which is quite good. And you went into the insert again. For your third F2L pair, you had the red and blue F2L pair, which you did the standard way. So this was similar to another case that you did earlier, which is just 3 sexies. And then finally, you found the red and green F2L pair, which you did a double rotation so that it was at the front, and then you inserted into the front slot. For this final F2L pair, instead of doing a double rotation to the front, instead you could have just moved the F2L pair over like this and did the same 3 moves into the back. So just a general rule of thumb, whenever you need to do a double rotation to do something in particular during F2L, it's a sign that you can do the exact same moves but into a back slot instead. So you should never have to do more than 1 rotation for any F2L case. So following that, you had 2-look OLO. And eventually you had the GA perm, which you did the RUD algorithm for. So once again, you did one of these around the cube just to have a look at what PLO it is. But in this case, you had all the information you need in the 3 faces that was facing you. So there was actually no need to look at the back or do any of this. So in this case, you have headlights and a 2x1 bar. It's definitely going to be the G-perm. There's nothing else it could possibly be. So I recommend trying not to do this during PLO, because that can deceptively take up to a second to do. Also, I noticed that you paused a little bit for AUF as well. For the G-perm algorithm that you did, which is the RUD algorithm, the AUF is indicated by the position of the headlights. So it's important that you can identify that before doing the PLO, so that after you do the PLO algorithm, you don't have to pause to recognize it again. Finally, just some tips in general. I noticed that you build your cross on the bottom, which is a very good habit. However, I noticed that you align the cross after inserting maybe 1 or 2 cross edges. Instead, I would recommend inserting all the cross edges into the D layer so that they're correct relative to each other, and then you can do a D or a D prime or a D2 to align the cross at the very end. It'll be a lot more efficient this way, since you won't have to move the pieces around on the top layer. Also, it is recommended that you find cross solutions that don't require any rotations and also have better finger tricks as well. That way you can do the cross quite quickly. So some things that might help you in this aspect is to use unlimited inspection time to try and come up with the best cross solutions. So this is what helped me come up with better cross solutions, and I feel like it'll be quite helpful for you as well. For F2L, try and insert your first F2L pair into a back slot. This will help with look ahead when you're trying to look for your next F2L pairs. Also, try and deduce hidden pieces rather than doing random U moves or just randomly rotating the cube. Deducing pieces might take up more time at the start when you're practicing it, but trust me, when you get used to it, it'll be a lot quicker than rotating or doing U moves. Also, try and use U2 double flicks during F2L. These finger tricks are really useful and they definitely will speed up your F2L as well. You use 2-look OLO and it seems like you're quite familiar with these algorithms, which is quite good. I actually wouldn't recommend learning full OLO until you average close to about 20 seconds. Before that, I recommend focusing more on cross and F2L. And finally, you seem to be quite familiar with your PLO algorithms. I would recommend not looking at the back during PLO recognition because all PLOs should be able to be recognized from 3 sides. Definitely looking at the left and right side is a lot quicker than looking at the back. Also, I would recommend doing U2 flicks during your PLO algorithms too. That will definitely speed up your PLOs. And finally, recognizing AUF before you do the PLO algorithm so that you don't have to pause and recognize AUF again after PLO. And finally, just in general, doing some slow untimed solves will definitely help with all the aspects I talked about from the above. And best of luck for your future cubing endeavors. So that's it for the critique video. If you have any questions about anything in this video, feel free to leave a comment down in the comment section below. Like the video if you learned something new. Please subscribe if you want to see more similar videos. And as always, I appreciate your support. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you guys soon.